In the dusty heart of Montana, where the endless plains met the jagged Rockies, young Eliza Thorne stood trembling at the edge of her family's weathered porch. At just 18, with hair like golden wheat and as white as the prairie sky, she had been promised, nay, given, to Harlan Blackwood, a widowed rancher twice her age, burdened with 3 motherless children. It was 1892, and in these hard-scrabble lands, survival often trumped dreams. Her father, crippled by debt from a failed harvest, had struck the deal over whiskey and desperation, Eliza's hand in exchange for the Blackwood Ranch's aid. "You're still pure, girl," her pa had muttered, as if that were a bargaining chip. "It'll make things right." As the wagon rattled away from her childhood home, Eliza clutched her small satchel, her heart pounding like thunder over the hills. What awaited her? A life of toil, perhaps resentment from the children, or worse, the cold indifference of a man scarred by loss. Little did she know, this union would unravel secrets, forge unbreakable bonds, and shock the entire valley with a revelation of the human spirit's boundless grace. Harlan Blackwood was a towering figure, his face etched with lines from years under the relentless sun. At 40, he had buried his wife, Sarah, 2 winters past, taken by fever that swept through like a vengeful wind. Left with little Emma, aged 6, rambunctious Tommy at 8, and the solemn eldest, 12-year-old Grace, Harlan had become a ghost of himself, working the ranch from dawn till dusk, his laughter buried with his love. The children, wild as the mustangs that roamed his land, needed a mother's touch, or so the townsfolk whispered. When Eliza arrived that crisp autumn evening, the ranch house loomed like a sentinel against the fading light. Harlan met her at the gate, his hat in hand, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Miss Thorne," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I ain't much for words, but this place needs help. The Yomuns, they need more than I can give." Eliza nodded, swallowing her fear, and stepped inside to a home that smelled of wood smoke and neglect. The children stared, Emma with curious eyes, Tommy with suspicion, and Grace with outright hostility, her arms crossed like a fortress. The first weeks were a blur of adjustment, a dance of awkward silences and tentative efforts. Eliza rose before dawn to milk the cows, scrub the floors, and mend clothes torn from play. She had expected drudgery, perhaps even cruelty, but Harlan was neither tyrant nor lover, he was simply absent, lost in his grief. He slept in the barn most nights, claiming the house felt too empty. "Ain't right to impose," he'd grumble. Eliza, raised in a home where affection was sparse, poured her energy into the children. Little Emma warmed first, clinging to Eliza's skirts like a burr, begging for stories of far-off cities she'd only read about in tattered books. Tommy tested her with pranks. Hiding her boots or releasing chickens into the kitchen, but Eliza met his mischief with gentle firmness, teaching him to whittle toys instead. Grace, however, was a storm cloud. "You ain't mama," she'd snap, slamming doors and vanishing to the fields for hours. One evening, as Eliza baked cornbread, Grace hurled a plate to the floor. "Why did Pa bring you here? We don't need no stranger." Tears glistened in the girl's eyes, and Eliza knelt, gathering the shards. "I know I ain't your ma, Grace. But maybe I can be a friend. Tell me about her, about Sarah." It was the first crack in the wall, a moment of vulnerability that hinted at deeper pains. As winter's chill descended, blanketing the ranch in snow, an unexpected turn shattered the fragile routine. A blizzard howled in from the north, fiercer than any in memory, trapping them indoors for days. Supplies dwindled, the cattle lowed in distress outside. Harlan ventured out to check the barn, but hours passed without return. Panic gripped Eliza as she bundled the children by the fire. "Stay here," she commanded, wrapping herself in Harlan's old coat. Venturing into the whiteout, her boots sinking deep, she followed faint tracks to the barn. There, she found Harlan collapsed against a stall, his leg twisted from a fall, frostbite nipping at his fingers. "Go back," he rasped, pride warring with pain. But Eliza refused. With strength born of necessity, she fashioned a splint from hay bales and rope, then half-dragged, half-carried him back through the storm. The children watched wide-eyed as she tended him by the hearth, brewing willow bark tea for the pain and wrapping his wounds. In that moment, Harlan saw her not as a bartered bride, but as a force of quiet resilience. "Why," he whispered that night, as the wind screamed outside. Eliza paused, her hand still on the bandage. "Because we're family now, like it or not. And family don't leave each other in the cold." The storm's aftermath brought a profound realization to the ranch. As the snow melted, revealing a world reborn, so too did the barriers between them. Harlan, bedridden for weeks, opened up in ways he hadn't since Sarah's death. He spoke of his wife's kindness, how she'd sing to the children and turn the harshest days into adventures. Elisa listened, sharing her own losses, a mother gone too young, a father hardened by failure. The children, witnessing this thaw, began to weave Eliza into their lives. Tommy confessed his pranks were born of fear, afraid she'd leave like their Mama drew pictures of them all together, a family under one roof. Even Grace softened, one night slipping into Eliza's room with a faded ribbon. "This was Ma's," she said, "boy small. She'd want you to have it." Eliza tied it in her hair, tears blurring her vision. But beneath this budding harmony lurked a secret that would test them all. Elisa discovered she carried a child, conceived in the tentative intimacy that had grown between her and Harlan after the storm. Yet, doubt not at her, was this love, or mere obligation? And how would the children react to a new sibling, stirring old wounds? Spring burst forth with wildflowers carpeting the plains, but with it came another twist, word from town that Eliza's father had fallen ill, his debts mounting like storm clouds. A letter arrived, pleading for help, money, or perhaps her return. Harlan, now healed but limping, read it with a furrowed brow. "You could go back," he offered, his voice steady but as betraying fear. "I won't hold you to this." The children overheard, their faces paling. Gracie, in particular, looked stricken, as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Eliza stood at the window, gazing at the vast horizon, her hand unconsciously on her belly. This was her crossroads: return to a life of familiarity and hardship, or embrace the unknown family she'd begun to build. That night, as stars wheeled overhead, she made her choice. Gathering everyone around the table, she burned the letter in the lantern's flame. "I'm staying," she declared. "Not because I have to, but because I want to. This is home now." Harlan's hand found hers, rough but warm, and the children erupted in hugs, their laughter echoing like a long-forgotten melody. Yet the true shock came not from her decision, but from the act of compassion that followed. Whispers in town painted Eliza as a saint or a fool, an innocent girl taming a broken man and his wild brood. But when summer's drought scorched the land, threatening the ranch and neighboring farms alike, Eliza's selflessness shone brightest. Harlan's herd suffered, calves dying in the heat, and deaths loomed once more. One sweltering day, a wagon arrived from the east, Eliza's inheritance, a modest sum from a distant end she'd never met, unearthed by a lawyer's letter. It was enough to save the ranch, buy feed, drill a new well. But Eliza saw beyond their fence. "We ain't the only ones hurting," she said to Harlan. Together, they rallied the valley, sharing the water from their strengthened well, distributing feed to struggling families, even hosting communal suppers where stories flowed like rain. Grace, inspired, organized the children to deliver baskets to widows and orphans. Tommy learned to repair tools for neighbors. Emma's drawings became symbols of hope, pinned in barns across the county. The emotional climax unfolded at the annual town fair, under a canopy of lanterns. As fiddles played and folks gathered, a grizzled old rancher, once Harlan's rival, stood to speak. "We thought Blackwood was done for after Sarah passed. Then this slip of a girl comes along, given like some prize. But she didn't just mend one family, she healed us all." Tears streamed as he recounted how Eliza's generosity had saved his own spread from ruin. Harlan, overcome, pulled Eliza close. "I thought I was saving you," he murmured, "but you saved us." In that moment, Eliza felt the transformative power of kindness ripple through her, not just in words, but in the faces around her, alight with gratitude. The children beamed, Grace whispering, "You're our ma now, in every way that matters." The crowd erupted in applause, the shock not of scandal, but of awed humanity's capacity for renewal. As autumn returned, painting the leaves in fiery hues, the Blackwood ranch thrived like never before. Elisa gave birth to a son, little Samuel, whose cries filled the house with joy. Harlan, no longer a shadow, laughed freely, teaching the boys to ride while Eliza and the girls tended the garden. The valley remembered that year not for the drought, but for the miracle of one young woman's heart. Elisa Torne, now Blackwood, had arrived as a reluctant bride, but left an indelible mark as a beacon of selflessness. In a world often divided by hardship, her story whispered a universal truth: true strength lies not in what we take, but in what we give. And in giving, we find not loss, but the profound connections that bind us all. Across the USA and beyond, tales like hers remind us that even in the harshest lands, kindness can bloom, inspiring hope that endures through every season.